Okay, good morning everybody.
Good morning.
Ask anybody what is the craziest country in the world, and I guarantee that at least 9 out of 10 people will answer North Korea. North Korea is a country very near to Japan. It's very much isolated. It has a history of war dominance from all over, from China, from Japan. A civil war in the 50s, and now it's a more or less autarky. Autarky means that it's more or less self-sustained. With very little import and export, it managed to sustain itself, but at a very high price. So today we're going to look at North Korea, and the question is, what's next? Because probably this cannot last much longer, but okay, if something is going to change, how it's going to change, and I hope we can discuss your opinions. So a few facts. North Korea became independent in 1945 after World War II. It has 25 million people and a GDP, a nominal GDP of 15 billion US dollars, which translates to $621 per person per year. Extremely low, one of the lowest in the world. It's a single party state, and the political theory is called Yuche, and Yuche means a system that is self-sustained. So it has relations with communism, it has relations with fascism, it has relations with dictatorships. But Yuche is a theory that was developed by Kim Il-sung, which was the founder of North Korea, of the contemporary North Korea. So look at a little history. Between 1910 and 1945, Korea has been occupied by Japan. There was resistance against Japan. It became stronger and stronger, and the resistance was called Dongnip-gun. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's written as Dongnip-gun. And Kim Il-sung was a part of Dongnip-gun. And the resistance became stronger and stronger. Because why was there so much resistance? Because basically North Koreans were more and more forced to become Japanese. Their language could not be taught any longer. Their history could not be taught any longer. So they were. Japan wanted to make them Japanese citizens, and the Koreans resisted. So between 1945, so after the war, in 1950, it was occupied by the Soviet Union. The main person there was Shtikov, and Shtikov worked together with Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was the first president of North Korea. Shtikov stepped back, became the ambassador to Korea, to North Korea, and took over in 1948. Now in 1950 the Korean War started. And why did the Korean War started? Because it was like the Cold War was starting to take effect, and North Korea was afraid that the United States would start an attack on North Korea, and therefore Kim Il-sung asked Shtikov whether he could get support from the Soviet Union if he were to engage in a preemptive strike. So that means offense is the best defense, is often said. So instead of waiting for an attack from the Americans, they decided to strike first. The Korean War led to a ridiculously high number of casualties. 1 million people died during the Korean War. Kim Il-sung died in 1994, then Kim Jong-il took over. He ruled till 2011. Soon after he took power, there was a big famine, 4 years. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people were underfed. If you look at the average height of young Koreans, young North Koreans and young South Koreans, then you will notice that there is a big difference, really like more than 5 centimeter difference in average height of young people, based on as a result of this malnutrition, of being underfed in their childhood. And in 2011, Kim Jong-un took over. I'm not telling too many new things, I hope. The basics you probably knew. At this moment, North Korea faces a number of challenges. Number one challenge, poverty, famine, hunger, even though the period of famine has officially ended, but still in the countryside there is still a lot of famine going on. And there was a report that probably the harvest this year will be very bad because of drought. Therefore, it is to be expected that that there may be another famine starting the end of this year. Then the cost of Songun. Songun means army first. North Korea has a very strong army, and the army costs a lot of money. So the costs are very high. Isolation. North Korea is completely isolated, so there is also a challenge there to overcome all your shortages, etc. So to instead of import, make everything yourself comes at a cost. And there is a challenge of leadership. The position of Kim Jong-un is not really unchallenged. Actually, it's very much challenged, and he is in a very difficult position as a young leader of a country which faces so many challenges. So let's have a look at the challenges in more detail. So first, poverty. This is a satellite picture from, well, you probably can see it, from Russia, South Korea and North Korea. And there's a big black hole in this picture, and that's not the ocean. This is North Korea by night. So here you can clearly see that North Korea has not been developed. This is one of the signs of poverty. There is very little going on, underdeveloped. So that is a big problem. If you look at the situation in both Koreas, then you can see the blue line here is South Korea. The red line is North Korea, and you can see that both countries were kind of like developing at the same pace. They came from a very low starting point after the war, and they grew gradually. Even at certain points in time, around 1970, the GDP in North Korea was higher than the GDP in South Korea. Marginally, but there was a time when it was higher. And then in 1972, it completely South Korea takes a very steep rise, and North Korea is not growing at all, and even decreasing, starting with Kim Jong-il. So now, as I said, like a GDP per head, nominal GDP per head of around $600. That's very, very low. So poverty is a very big challenge, because poverty leads to revolt. Famine. Famine, a lack of food. This is the proportion of the population. Oh, sorry, I'm standing in front of it. The proportion of the population of undernourished people. In 1990, between 1990 and 1992, it was about 20%. But in 2008, 40% of the population was undernourished, so they had not enough food. So that was a very, very big problem. And the problem became worse because a lot of the food that was in North Korea was actually allocated to the military. And not only the food was allocated, also the resources. So instead of trying to develop an agricultural sector that could sustain the population of North Korea, they actually chose to allocate resources, money, to the military, because the military basically decides how long the Kim family can stay in power. A black market started to come in place, and that also meant that people were distracted. Black market means that they could make a little money. Farmers could make a little money by selling their produce on a black market, but that usually leads to a lot of attention to their own private enterprise and very little attention to growing crops. So that actually led to inefficiencies, because there was no way that they could engage in large-scale black market activities, because there was too much control of the military. There is too much control of the military on the farming population. And there are warning signs ahead, I already mentioned this, of yet another harvest. So, poverty and famine. Some good military first. So 25 million North Koreans, 1.2 million people are officially in the army, in military people. So that's a very, very high percent. And if you include all the reserves, it's 9.5 million. It has the fourth largest army in the world. And it takes about 15% of the entire budget. So that it's an enormous burden, but they have excellent military, as you can see. They even have medals on their pants. So that costs a little bit more. Another big cost is the arms race. North Korea, because they have no friends, they need to deter, they need to have bargaining chips. They started an arms race, developing their own nuclear weapons, and they have a lot of nuclear facilities, as you can see on this map. How effective these weapons are is widely challenged. They are highly inaccurate, the nuclear weapons, but that also is a threat. It's a threat for countries like China, who would probably not be the first country to be on the target list of North Korea. But these rockets, once they're in the air, nobody knows where they will be going. So that's a big risk. But this is how North Korea tries to remain relevant in the world. This is how they can so they have a huge army in combination with nuclear weapons, and this is how they're trying to get everybody back on the negotiation table, and particularly the United States. They want to negotiate with the United States. But you can imagine, if you have to develop everything in-house, that this comes at a very high cost. This is a list of the countries that support North Korea. And this is leadership. Leadership, we don't hear so much about it in the daily news, but there is a lot of turmoil surrounding, especially Kim Jong-un. Sorry. There's a lot of because he's very young. He just came to power, and he needs to establish a power base. Kim Il-sung was, of course, he also had opponents, but he had a lot of support. Kim Jong-il started to change. With Kim Jong-il, he needed more and more support of the military, and in order to achieve that, he started a so-called second economy. A second economy where he took money away from revenues away from the economy and allocated directly to himself, and then he gave presents, like very luxurious presents, to important people in order to get their support. But that system started to escalate, because if you give a smaller present, then people misinterpret that. So once you get a car, next year you expect a car again, or at least something at least as valuable as that car. So that the cost of sustaining that power became very high. Revenues that should have been allocated to growing up the economy were just wasted through consumption. This is a picture of the uncle of Kim Jong-un, and he was arrested and killed because of treason. And treason means that he betrayed the state of North Korea. The official reason, that was the official reason. The unofficial reason was that his uncle was in charge of reforming the economy. And he chose to engage with China, to establish relationships with China. They started a project, and they get more and more. He established more and more relations with China, and with that came money. Money started to flow, and some of the money he diverted away from the private funds of Kim Jong-un and allocated somewhere else. And this was very much against the will of Kim Jong-un, and therefore he said he tried to overthrow the government. Some people claim that he was trying to modernize North Korea, trying to open up, trying to establish more open relationships so that they could go to a transformation and grow the economy. But it's not 100% clear. Like, none of what you hear you can take at face value. None of what you see almost you can take at face value, because it's very difficult to get an honest opinion, an honest report on statistics or anything. But one thing was sure, China was very angry about this execution. And that definitely spoiled the relationship between North Korea and China, and one of the last friends that they had.
In the previous week, we didn't see any country on the list who support
Yes.
North Korea.
Yes.
Is this how it is?
That's how it is.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. That's currently nobody supports North Korea. And maybe a country like Iran, with whom they exchange some nuclear goodies. There are, well, more or less relationships, but it's not really like they put themselves on top of the wedding invitation list. So it's there is no country that has good ties with North Korea. So we have seen so many problems, so many challenges for North Korea. Then the question is, probably this cannot go on forever. Somehow, something has got to change. So what could happen? Maybe Kim Jong-un could be assassinated, killed. Or there could be a coup d'etat. The regime could collapse. There could be a war, for example, or changes could start to occur. And I've looked up a number of predictions by North Koreans who fled the country. They are a good source of information. Many of them live in South Korea. Also, quite a few live in the United States. And they have seen firsthand what it's like in North Korea, and they probably have a much better idea than we have on what might happen. So let's look at a number of these predictions. So, assassination. Neighboring countries like South Korea do not wish a collapse to happen. As such, I believe the North Korean regime will only collapse when Kim Jong-un dies. For me, only an assassination could cause this. So, this is very important, this statement, because why does North Korea still exist? Of course they have nuclear weapons, of course they have a large army, but their army is very much outdated. They have very old equipment. For example, their air force would mean nothing against South Korea, and especially South Korea in combination with the United States. So it's why didn't they just end it and attack North Korea and bring the Kim Jong-un to his knees? Well, the reason is that they cannot be sure what will happen next. So now at least they know who they're facing, but it's very tricky to see what will happen next after they assassinate it. It could very well be that even worse a leader would stand up and take control of the country. So because it's so unpredictable, a lot of countries who do not support North Korea as such, they just try to keep it at a minimum level, providing it with a little food aid, with a little support now and then, just under the pretense of humanitarian aid, keep the regime alive. Another comment. Therefore, I therefore believe Kim Jong-un will be assassinated within the next 3 years due to a power struggle, and this will lead to the collapse and the end of North Korean regime. So another person thinks that the assassination will take place. There are too many. He has too many enemies within North Korea. Too little support from the army. Too many factions within the country who want to bring him down, and he will die. And both refugees think that will be the end of the North Korean regime.
How should we understand the what in the South Korea don't wish a collapse to happen?
Do not wish a collapse to happen.
So that means
they don't want to completely let it collapse, because after that, a lot of things could happen. So, for example, they have nuclear weapons. Who will take control over those nuclear weapons? Where will they go? We don't know. Just like in the Soviet Union, when it came to a fall, they had a large arsenal with nuclear weapons. A lot of things end up in hands where you don't really want it. Oil industry in the Soviet Union was an example. It immediately came in the hands of the mafia. A country which has so many nuclear weapons, it's very dangerous. Where would everybody flee to? There is a big chance that there could start some kind of a civil war within North Korea. There's all scenarios that you don't want next door. So that's why South Korea does not want to crush North Korea. They have been trying to establish some kind of reunification.
So they don't want them to collapse and going somewhere by themselves, out of control.
Exactly. So as soon as this gets out of control, it really can get out of control. Yeah. So a coup d'état. It's apparent that there was a power struggle within the top elite, and this struggle was caused primarily by economic factors. In addition, it seems that people have doubts about Kim Jong-un's abilities as a leader. So poverty is the main factor that will contribute ultimately to a coup d'état. If you push people against the wall, they could very well end up standing up against you. And a lot of people are with their backs against the wall. Since Kim Jong-un is very young, he's likely to purge many of the older, experienced government officials from the Kim Jong-il era to replace them with younger officials. So to replace the incumbent power with younger power. So he already purged quite a few. So this was a statement that was given not very recently, but since that, I believe there were 9 executions of military officials. And he will have to replace those people. The younger people will take place. Initially, that may weaken the position of his enemy, but ultimately, these younger forces will grow up and are very much more likely to turn against him than the existing power. So it's a temporary solution that could eventually work out in his disadvantage. I believe North Korea's future will be decided by a power struggle between the reactionaries, intent on maintaining their vested interests, versus growing but still insignificant progressive faction. It will be these reformists who will have legitimacy and the people's support in their corner. So I told you about this gift economy, where the leader Kim Jong-un hands out many gifts to the people who are in leadership positions. Those people have a lot of vested interests, so they get nice houses, nice cars, whatever. So these people will try to hold on to their privileged position. But there is at the moment a very small group of progressive. So it is a small group of progressive, but they have legitimacy. So it is, this person believes that even though the group is still small now, eventually they will rise up and overthrow the government. So the people will revolt against their leaders. That's what they are saying, because the leaders are too much divided among themselves. Collapse. People who believe that there may be a collapse of North Korea. Although North Koreans may not yet understand the full concept of capitalism, they know how it works according to their daily way of life. And most of all, they know that Kim Jong-un is the ultimate obstacle to a free market. So, small reforms have been enacted. Small reforms that to take away the worst problems in the countryside, the worst poverty in the countryside. They allow very small private activities. So you can sell very small parts of your crop on the private market. Now this is a first taste. North Koreans do not have the experience with that. Many of them were born and raised under the North Korean regime. But this taste will not go away, the way that they can make money and provide for themselves. This eventually will be the seed that will lead to collapse of North Korea, is what one of these commentators claim. My assumption is that in the next 5 years people will start to feel the need to change their governments, and 3 years after that Kim Jong-un's regime will collapse. So within 8 years there will be a collapse of the Kim Jong-un regime. I therefore believe that as long as the outside world continues to provide it with aid, the regime will not collapse. South Korea, United States, humanitarian aid, it can also do a lot to keep countries alive. I wonder if the regime would have been able to survive at all if all that food and clothing aid had not come from China during the famine. As such, I believe that as long as China doesn't give up on North Korea, the regime will continue to survive. China has the same worries as South Korea. What will happen? They are right next door. They don't want that to explode. So this is something that none of the countries around it has a best interest in. So even though they're enemies, it's better know thy enemy, as they say in English. War. Would North Korea go to war? They have nuclear weapons, they have a huge army, but going to war would equal suicide. Military experts agree on this. Even though they could severely damage South Korea, for example, with conventional weapons, with their large army, but there's no way that they can beat South Korea, even if only South Korea were to engage. Even if the United States would not interfere, even China would not interfere. North Korea, if they would go to war, that would be the end of it. But remember, Kim Jong-un is completely backed in a corner. He has no way to go. And very often in situations like that, people do crazy stuff. They say, okay, I don't know any way out. I need to unify this country. I need to do something. So it could very well be that Kim Jong-un would at a certain point in time say, okay, let's go to war. A common enemy is usually the best way to unite your country. Unfortunately for Kim Jong-un, it doesn't seem that he will be capable of uniting everybody against him, even though they have the common enemy, the outside world. So going to war would equal suicide. It would very quickly end. Changes, no dramatical, no coup d'état, no assassination or other drastical things. Gradual changes. Some of the refugees believe that these gradual changes could take place. It seems like North Korea will undergo changes within the next 5 years. But when I say change, I'm talking about gradual changes, including reformations and an open door policy, not the collapse of the North Korean regime. So changes like we have seen in China. It was a long process, but a gradual change away from a communist regime or the Korean regime towards a more open regime with relationships with trade and with gradually introducing capitalism within North Korea. So it will not be a big collapse, a big bang. It will be a more gradual change. The People's Republic of Korea is currently suffering from severe economic problems, and if Kim Jong-un wants to stay in power, he must try and solve these significant economic problems affecting the country. So he can do it step by step if he manages to tackle these problems. Because of the weak base of his political power, we can therefore expect some level of economic reforms in the future. So he can only save his skin if he reforms. He has no choice. He has to do it. And North Korea's international isolation will be intensified. So in order to restore this, some attempts towards economic reform will be inevitable in North Korea. So this is what quite a few of the refugees believe will happen. Under pressure, Kim Jong-un will have to make concessions and making reforms. Stop this gift economy. Give people more rights. What that will mean for his future also remains uncertain. Usually the people who go through this process, not in China, but for example in Russia, they will eventually be the victim if once they let go of their firm control. But a lot of people who have been close to that regime, who are observers of this, believe that changes are possible. And what would that mean? For example, this is a graph, I think it was from The Economist if I'm not mistaken, but the prognosis of the economic development in North Korea, if they were to engage in these reforms, would mean that instead of the red bars, the status quo, so no changes, versus the blue bars. So economic reforms could mean significant improvements in the living situation within North Korea. So there is potential for reforms. And then there is the reunification. So bringing North and South Korea back together. It sounds crazy. It sounds crazy because they're completely opposite regimes. They have the same ethnic background, they have the same language, but they're completely opposite. And I was very surprised to find this information. It is in a large an interview was held under under South Korean in their 20s, so between 20 and 30 years old, and they were asked, okay, how do you view North Koreans? And as one of us, so that's the blue line, one of us was about 18% believe that they are one of us, so that we should be one people. As a neighbor, so not really as an enemy, but as a neighbor, was at 2012 almost 40%, decreased a little bit. As a stranger, approximately 15%. As an enemy, 25%. So if you put these together, one of us, neighbor and stranger, you have quite a large majority. So the young generation of South Koreans does not necessarily have very, very negative attitude towards North Koreans. So that means something for the future. So maybe there are opportunities to actually bring these two countries together. And it would actually also be beneficial to South Korea, because in South Korea they are also facing challenges. So they have low growth at the moment, low prices, low employment, low fertility rate, and an aging population. And if they would decide to reunify, that would mean 80 million population together with North Korea. Investment in North Korea, the investment opportunities are enormous. There is nothing there. If you put anything there, it could lead to enormous leverage effects. And North Korea could provide a valuable source of labor. They could also, that would be a very big advantage to South Korea. They would take away the nuclear threat from the north, which would mean that they would have to focus less on their military development, and it's just a much more pleasant idea that you don't have a crazy guy living next door who has nuclear weapons. So reunification, I thought honestly that it would be that would be a crazy idea, but maybe it's not as crazy as I initially thought it was. So, the question is, what do you think? What's next? What's going to happen? Sorry, the photo has nothing to do with it, but I just liked it. So, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen next?
So what's being discussed is the outside of North Korea is relatively stable. Among the thought and intention from China and the United States and the decreasing situation of the South Korea. But as we saw in the page, earlier page, that the North Korea itself is cannot be said as being stable.
So the internal situation in North Korea is not stable. They are, and they always have been, like a hermit state. Hermit means that they are kind of living to themselves. They are living to themselves. But even though they are in themselves, they are not stable, because within North Korea there is famine, there is poverty, there is the shadow economy, there are people with vested interests. There's a lot of factors that make the country in itself unstable. The countries around it, they are more or less stable, because at this moment nobody wants to be friends with North Korea, but nobody wants it to collapse either, because that risk is just too big.
And the thinking for them to be stable is like they don't want the North Korea to be to collapse by themselves out of control.
Yes.
So North Korea and China don't want them to be gone. But of course, they don't want them to do anything as North Korea wants to do. So so the implication, the possible implication is like the who will take and who will take over, undertake the North Korea after something happened.
But we don't know that. So who are we going to put in charge there? Are we going to put South Koreans there, or how is Japan going to deal with the situation? We have the abduction issue that is not being resolved, has not been resolved, and will probably not resolve. It's the only chip that North Korea has with in negotiations with Japan, for example. What can they do? So if looking at the situation.
Yeah, so the better way is someone else from the existing the people in power is coming from North Korea itself.
So a leader from within the country, but as far as we know now, it's very difficult to find somebody who will be a desirable leader. It's because at this moment it's very difficult to find truth in any of the leaders, because of how they can express themselves and their true intentions. It's very difficult to understand who is a reformist. And reformist, as soon as they are known as reformists, that's the end of it. So nobody can make himself or herself known as a prospective leader of North Korea.
So thinking that anything remarkable, anything constructive has not been happened in the country. So the reformist is not likely to come out. So maybe have to wait the things going down, going worse, and the people will be suffering more. In that sense, only in that sense, it's like the Europe to see the Greece to going down and suffering more. So if you want anything, you have to change yourself by yourself. Yeah.
I mean, what has happened so far is that by providing humanitarian aid, they have extended the suffering. Just providing enough to prevent a big revolt against the regime. Because as soon as people only have a choice of dying or overthrowing the government, then more people will take that decision, of course, to overthrow the government. So by providing them with at least enough to survive, so there is another option: do nothing and receive food aid and receive clothing aid. That was enough to alleviate most of those pressures on the regime. So as long as the international community keeps giving a little bit of aid, the chances of a revolution become less. And this has been the policy of China, the policy of South Korea as well.
I think it's a little bit similar to the Myanmar in the past. But Myanmar now just developed, because the leader of the Myanmar government decided to develop the relationships with the United States, with international things like that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now North Korea doesn't want to change themselves,
No.
so it doesn't matter.
No, that is their policy. Basically, their aim is to become completely independent state, really independent of anybody. So to keep their economy and everything alive, their ultimate goal is to become a autarky, a completely self-sustained empire.
The leader doesn't matter who's just going to die, saying they are, the countries.
Yes, it's for the countries, for the greater good. But it's a humanitarian disaster, of course, for the people who have to live under that regime. Of course there are pressures on that government because it's not successful. It comes at a very high cost. If there are not enough means to distribute, then you have to make choices. So what North Korea has been doing is, or at least the leadership has been doing, is choosing the military first. So they, if you look at YouTube videos of news broadcasts, you see this little bit stocky older lady who is always making this, and it's usually about the evil empire United States and their bad intentions, always instilling that image of an enemy. So to have an enemy that justifies that we are at war. North Korea believes that they're in a constant state of war with the people around it, which justifies that they can spend like 15% of their GDP on the military. It's men in the age between 15 and 54. 20% of men are in the army, are soldiers. So 1 in 5 are not working in agriculture, are not working in factories. They are military. So that is like a huge proportion of your production capacity that you just take out in order to sustain the system.